right, welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving deep into some of the financial forecasts surrounding Trump's return to the White House. Got a whole stack of articles here analyzing potential impacts from his economic policies. And, well, it's kind of shaping up to be a bit of a mixed bag of predictions, to say the least.
Yeah, a very complex landscape, no doubt about that. So many different economic factors, all kind of intertwined. We'll have to unpack each one carefully to see how it all fits together. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah. So one of the big issues that kept coming up during the campaign was inflation. Trump was really pushing hard on that, saying he'd get it under control.
Oh, absolutely. And one of his proposed tools for that is these tariffs on goods from places like China, Mexico, and Canada. But those could actually end up doing the opposite, you know?
Really? How so?
Well, by making imported stuff more expensive, those costs could just get passed on to us, the consumers.
Yeah.
And that would just push prices up even more.
Oh, yeah, I see. One of the articles here actually quotes Janet Yellen, the current Treasury Secretary. She says these tariffs could derail efforts to fight inflation.
Yeah, derail is definitely a strong word. It's not mincing words there. And, Goldman Sachs, they're predicting these tariffs could actually increase inflation by a whole percentage point.
Wow, that's not nothing.
Not at all. And then we've got to factor in the impact of Trump's immigration policies. Think about it.
You mean his stance on deportations?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That could lead to a worker shortage, which would push wages up. And then what happens? Higher labor costs, higher prices for consumers, more inflation. Good cycle.
So basically, trying to lower inflation could end up making it worse.
That's the concern some experts are raising. It's a real possibility. All right, let's switch gears a bit and talk about interest rates for a minute. So Trump's keeping Jay Powell as Fed chair, the guy who sets those rates, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But here's where it gets a little interesting. Remember how Trump's publicly criticized Powell before? He's been pushing for lower rates to try and boost the economy.
Oh, right. Yeah, he has.
So that puts Powell in a tricky spot, trying to balance the Fed's independence with all that outside pressure.
It's a tough balancing act, for sure, especially with the national debt climbing and all those costs rising, too.
No doubt. That pressure to manipulate interest rates is going to be huge. Now let's shift gears again. Let's talk about the U.S. dollar. Trump's team has been pretty clear they think it's way too strong right now.
Yeah, and that's where Scott Bessent comes in, right? Trump's pick for Treasury Secretary.
Exactly. He's been hinting at some big changes to the global economic order, possibly even a new Bretton Woods agreement. Ever heard of that?
Whoa! Bretton Woods, wasn't that like the agreement that set up the whole global financial system after World War II?
Precisely. Bessent's even suggested that the U.S. might push for a G20 meeting to orchestrate a currency devaluation. Kind of like the 1985 Plaza Accord, where major economies got together and agreed to devalue the dollar to fix trade problems.
Interesting. But hold on, wouldn't all those tariffs Trump wants actually make the dollar stronger? It seems like they're trying to do two opposite things at the same time.
That's a good point. You're right. On the one hand, they want a weaker dollar to make U.S. exports cheaper and more competitive. But then their policies, like the tariffs, could actually make the dollar stronger.
So a lot of potential contradictions there. How does all this affect the trade deficit, which was another big thing Trump focused on? He's always talking about shrinking it.
Well, on this one, his team seems to be throwing out traditional economic theory. They're saying they can use tariffs and America's economic power to shrink the deficit while still attracting foreign investment.
It sounds like they're trying to have their cake and eat it, too.
It's definitely a tough balancing act, and lots of economists are scratching their heads about it. If we look at the historical data, the U.S. trade deficit actually grew wider during Trump's first term.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So there's not a ton of evidence to say that this strategy is going to work this time around. Now, let's talk about another interesting element here. Trump's views on the BRICS nations. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa.
Yeah, he made some pretty strong statements about them threatening sanctions if they created their own currency to rival the dollar.
He did, but there's no real sign they're actually planning to do that. It feels more like a preemptive move.
A warning shot, maybe.
It could be.
Yeah.
But even free market groups like the American Enterprise Institute, they've said that this kind of unpredictable behavior could actually push countries away from the dollar. And that would be counterproductive, right?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot to unpack there. Inflation, interest rates, the dollar, the trade deficit, even global currency politics. Is there anything else we need to consider for this economic puzzle?
Well, the big one, of course, the elephant in the room, the national debt. Trump's setting a goal to shrink the deficit for quite a bit.
That's a good goal. But didn't he also promise those huge tax cuts? How's he going to do both?
That's the big question. His team says economic growth, Spending cuts and tariff revenue will make up the difference.
But are economists buying that?
A lot of them are skeptical, yeah. They're not sure it's realistic to hit all those targets at the same time. It's like trying to juggle 5 balls while riding a unicycle. A lot could go wrong.
So a lot of uncertainty and potential contradictions in this economic plan. What does all this mean for the average person?
It means buckle up. This is going to affect people's lives, jobs, mortgages, retirement savings. We've got to understand what the consequences of these policies could be.
Right, yeah, it's not just numbers on a spreadsheet. This is about real people's lives. So let's dig into some of these specific areas, like what are some of the potential pressure points we should be keeping our eyes on?
One big one is manufacturing. Trump's been very vocal about bringing manufacturing jobs back to the U.S., and tariffs are a key part of that plan. But some manufacturers are already voicing concerns.
Yeah, because if their imported parts get more expensive, the profits get squeezed.
Exactly. And then there's the chance of retaliatory tariffs from other countries,
Right.
which could spark a trade war. And that wouldn't be good for anyone, right?
Nobody wins in a trade war, yeah.
Very rarely. And those higher costs would likely end up getting passed along to consumers, meaning we all pay more for everything. And then, of course, we have to remember potential job losses if those manufacturing companies can't compete.
So tariffs could help some industries, but hurt others.
Definitely. A real balancing act. Now, let's talk energy. Trump's a big proponent of energy independence, and he's been pretty critical of renewable energy.
So it sounds like his policies will probably reflect that.
Yeah, probably a continued focus on fossil fuels with maybe less emphasis on renewables like solar and wind.
And what about the environmental impact of all that? We're already seeing the effects of climate change all around us.
You're right. It's a major concern. And a return to focusing on fossil fuels could make those problems even worse. Air quality, climate change, the whole picture. Speaking of concerns, how about the stock market? It's been all over the place lately, and Trump's win has definitely added to that volatility.
Yeah, my own portfolio's been doing that roller coaster thing. It's a little nerve-wracking.
It is. Markets don't like uncertainty, and there's a ton of it right now. We have to try and figure out what's driving those big swings.
Okay, so what are some of the key things to watch for?
Keep an eye on inflation, for sure, and interest rates, and those trade policies we talked about. Any big changes there could really shake things up in the market.
Got it. And what about the rest of the world? How are other countries reacting to all this?
It's a mixed bag. Some are worried, especially those that depend heavily on trade with the U.S. They're concerned about the potential for instability and trade disruptions if those tariffs start flying around.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Others are taking more of a wait-and-see approach, hoping things will settle down.
We can only hope.
Exactly. And it's not just about economics. There's the whole geopolitical side of things, too.
How the U.S. interacts with other countries on the world stage, you mean?
Exactly. Trump's foreign policy style is, well, let's just say unconventional. His choices on trade, alliances, international agreements, all of those can have a huge ripple effect globally.
So everyone's watching and waiting to see what happens next.
In a lot of ways, yeah. That's why it's so important for all of us to stay informed and try to understand these forces at play. We need to be able to analyze what different policy decisions could mean.
Like you always say, knowledge is power.
Exactly. The more we understand, the better we'll be able to navigate these uncertain times. And remember, economics isn't some abstract thing detached from our lives. It's deeply intertwined with everything we do, and we need to be active in shaping that landscape.
All right, so we've covered a ton here. Inflation, interest rates, trade wars, global politics. What's the big takeaway for our listeners? What should they be paying attention to in the next few months?
Well, the big thing is this. Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride, potentially bumpy. Pay attention to those key economic indicators we talked about. Inflation, interest rates, the value of the dollar, trade deals.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and maybe keep some antacids handy for those stock market swings.
A little preparation never hurts. But seriously, the more informed we are, the better we can navigate all this.
And who knows, maybe even learn something along the way.
That's the goal. We've only scratched the surface here, but hopefully this gives our listeners a good foundation to build on.
So we've talked about the potential storm clouds on the horizon, but you did say there were some bright spots too. Where are those hiding?
Well, one area where things might turn out well is infrastructure. Remember those big plans Trump was talking about during his campaign? Roads, bridges, airports, everything.
Yeah, those are some big plans, but can he actually pull it off this
$1
time?
million question, right?
Yeah.
But if he manages to get some of those projects going, it could have a really positive ripple effect throughout the economy.
How so?
Well, think about it. New infrastructure means jobs, right? It stimulates growth and could even boost our competitiveness on a global scale.
So those old rusty bridges finally getting some love, that's good for everyone, right?
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
But of course, it all comes down to the details. How will they pay for all this? Is it environmentally sustainable? Those are big questions.
We don't want to sacrifice the environment for economic growth. Yeah.
Absolutely not. Now,
Mhm.
speaking of innovation, what about the tech sector? It's always been a big driver of growth, hasn't it?
Silicon Valley is still humming, right?
Oh, yeah, it is. And there are exciting things happening in areas like artificial intelligence, biotechnology, renewable energy. Those are sectors with the potential to create new jobs, make our lives better, and tackle some of those big challenges we're facing.
So even with all the economic uncertainty, there's still room for optimism and progress.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing those opportunities and making smart investments, both as individuals and as a country.
Okay, but how can people find reliable information about these potential growth areas? There's so much information out there, it's hard to know what to trust.
You've got to be picky about your information sources. Look for reputable places like independent research institutions, respected financial publications, those nonpartisan think tanks.
Do your research, basically.
Exactly. Don't just rely on social media or flashy headlines. Dig a little deeper. Look for data, look for evidence, and be willing to challenge your own assumptions.
Then maybe take everything with a grain of salt, right? Especially when it comes to economic predictions.
A healthy dose of skepticism is never a bad thing. No one has a crystal ball, the future is always uncertain, and there will always be surprises along the way.
So be informed, be skeptical, and be a little adventurous. Embrace the unknown.
That's a great way to put it. The economic landscape is constantly changing, and we need to be adaptable and open to new possibilities.
So what's the final message for our listeners today? What should they be thinking about as they navigate all this complex economic stuff?
I'd say this: stay informed, stay engaged, and stay optimistic. The future is full of challenges, but it's also full of opportunities. By understanding what's going on and making smart decisions, we can all contribute to a more prosperous and equitable future.
Now that's a message we can all get behind. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Trumponomics. It's been a wild ride, but hopefully our listeners are feeling a little more informed and a little more empowered to face whatever economic challenges or opportunities come their way.
It's been great sharing these insights with you and our listeners. Remember, knowledge is power, and together we can navigate these uncertain times with confidence and resilience.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
Absolutely. See y'all.